giving up the control and the creativity to a robot, to a bot, is a very dangerous place to be, right? It's like the same way I feel like, these automated cars where, it's great to have assist, but, we only see and read maybe like a fifth of the reports coming out of Tesla, what's happening with the automated driving. And it's not there. It's super dangerous, right? There's a lot of accidents. So it's like, again, giving up full control, I think, to anything is a little scary, right?
Thank you for listening to Serves You Right. My name is Andrew, your host. And if this is your first time tuning in, this show is all about the hospitality world. That's restaurants, bars. I've spent the last 20 years doing my best, trying to learn everything I can about hospitality and, in all honesty, getting kicked in the ass a couple times. So now I'm trying to find people who've done it well and share it with the world. On that note, today we have Seth Alexander of Barrel Aged Management, BAM. And yes, he did choose the name for that acronym for that reason. Seth goes around and helps different operations, restaurants, hotel chains, and everything in between fix operations, understand where things are going wrong, and help them go right. We talk a lot about chefs revisiting and re-examining old contracts and food vendors. We talk about how to do things right and the future of AI in the hospitality space, and so much more. So without any further ado, here is Seth Alexander, and thank you for listening to Serves You Right. Well, Seth Alexander, thank you for joining us on Serves You Right today. It's a pleasure to talk to you.
You as well. Thank you for having me on.
So I thought we'd jump right in. First of all, one of the best names I've seen for anyone's company, Barrel Aged Management. Where did you come up with that? What do you guys do? And how would you give us, maybe start with an elevator pitch and we'll dig in from there.
Yeah, okay. So I'll go, the elevator pitch is, we're a hospitality development and asset performance studio focused on the crossroads of real estate and hospitality. Pretty much built to be a strategic partner to help guide either hoteliers, restaurateurs, developers, investors, through the gamut of hospitality. Pretty much if it touches that realm, we pretty much do it.
Anything that touches hospitality. How does real estate come in there?
For the name.
Yeah. No, sorry.
The name was interesting. I think I'll claim it. I know it's probably not true, but this was probably back in early to mid 2000s. I have a friend who owned a winery, and we had this idea to barrel age a cocktail, right? So I'll claim that I was one of the first, and at the time I was in operations and I was trying to get every restaurant that either I worked in or doesn't make any sense. Why would you age a cocktail, etc. And the name just kind of stuck with me. And then if you look at the initials, it's BAM. So I was like, this is fantastic. And then we have a whole sub of companies. So, we do barrel aged development, which is bad. And then we have barrel aged real estate, which is bar. And it just kept working. Everything just kind of kept continuing. Barrel age operations, which is BOW. And I was like, you know what, there's something here. Let's just keep it. And we started, almost 15 years ago.
Awesome.
Yeah, so we've been in it for a while. And I'm sorry, the secondary question was...
What led you to start it?
Basically it was around the crash of 2008, similar, not as impactful as COVID, but, at the time, and I was based in Miami, I had a huge impact on the industry. And, a lot of restaurants were closing, a lot of hotels were streamlining, and there was just a lot of creatives that were out of a job. Quote unquote, consulting kind of became the last leg for everyone to kind of stand on. But, at the time, as you could imagine, there were a lot of people who would take advantage of the situation, right? Of having an independent, creative or talented individual who wasn't backed by a company. And they were being taken advantage of, payments, contracts, etc. And, at the time, I thought, well, you know what? They need an infrastructure, right? My mom was an attorney, and her partner used to do collections. This is when she first started.
So they know what they're doing.
Wait a second. Yeah, I was like, you know what? I was like, there's probably something here. what if I could team up with this guy and help out? It really started with a couple of buddies, right? I had a buddy who was doing some consulting as a bartender, a buddy who was doing consulting as a chef, and said, well, you know what, let me see if I can help. So it really started as just like an infrastructure for creatives. Our little tagline back then was let the creatives be creative, and we would come in and kind of help when it came to, streamlining costs, proposals, pitches, and then obviously collections on certain debts when people
making sure you actually get that money. Yeah.
Yeah. And from there, it just kind of grew. I had it dormant for a few years while I was working, in the professional realm, but always kind of had it where I would do a little bit of recruiting or I would do some development work. But then, around the COVID time, we were just kind of set up for a situation like that. And I had kind of been in that realm before, with the real estate crash. And as you could imagine within the development world, especially within hotels and restaurants, the entire corporate infrastructure was dismantled, right? You had no more directors of service. You had no more directors of beverage.
Overnight, yes.
Culinary, right? But, within the day-to-day operations, most restaurants and hotels obviously shuttered, but development was still going, right? Like developers were really looking at the 2-year, 3-year, 4-year, 5-year plan, and they needed that type of support. So we were able to kind of come in and fill that gap. And then as things kind of continued to grow, we were able to basically grow about 3x. And we were doing some leadership sourcing, we were doing development, concept development, we were doing operational support, and it just kind of at that point made sense to really focus on that. And then almost about a year to a year and a half in, my wife and partner, who was vice president of Montage and Pendry hotels, decided to kind of leave and work with me. And she turned the company from really a little bit more independent and boutique to a little bit more institutional. We started going after hotel portfolios that lacked corporate infrastructure, right? So like, as you could imagine, not everyone, even though you would think now they own everything, but not everyone is the Marriotts, the Highgates, the Hiltons, and they'll have 3, 4, 5, 6 hotels in a portfolio with no corporate F&B infrastructure, right? So they're missing on all that economies of scale. They're missing on all the synergies that could happen between different demographics and markets. So we kind of act as a white label food and beverage department for them.
That's cool. And that is funny to see how COVID affected so many different people so differently. It's almost like you got caught selling toilet paper in the middle of COVID. Like all of a sudden, it's like, okay, everyone wants what I have because there's no one else doing it.
Right.
This is great.
There's a lot of like, oh, we have a property and we need, some support. So we developed, a couple different departments. We have task force that literally helps with like the day-to-day and bridging gaps. We have people who do the concept development, but execution, almost similar to like an asset manager, where instead of us sitting at the table and kind of like pointing out everything that's going wrong and then trying to like hand it down to the operators who usually at that point have, smaller org charts, costs have already been cut. We do the asset management aspect, but we also go in and we execute it, right? So instead of me saying, here are the 15 things that you need to do to perform a little bit better, here, give it to your GM and F&B director who are already stretched pretty thin, we bring in an operational team to work kind of hand in hand with them to execute the operation. So, and,
in the day-to-day
question of how, in the day-to-day.
Like, how does that work? Is it just like all of a sudden you have an influx of 5 new managers, kind of like? That strikes me as kind of cool.
In a way, depends on what it is, right? So like, for example, if we're doing, I'll kind of divide it in two of, say, like development, which is probably a property that's not open yet, right? Or say something like a repositioning or a refinement, which is a property that is in operation. So say, for example, you have a venue and it's busy, but you're just not making money. Right. We will literally come in and we'll say, okay, well, let's cost out every single item. Let's negotiate with all of your vendors. Let's go in and look at your P mixes. The things that a larger team would do if they had the time and the resources. And then say, for example, we find, well, wow, like 50% of your menu was costed wrong or is really not selling on P mix. We bring in a culinary specialist and we will create the menu and then work side by side with your team on training them on how to make it, where to purchase it, how to store it, and then say for that example, then we leave. And then we do the same thing across the board.
Yeah, okay. So like, my hamburger, I thought it cost $6, but it actually cost me $12 and I'm only charging $14. So huge issue. Or like the salad that we're really proud of that's on there, no one's ordering and it's going bad. Once a week, we're throwing out like a couple $100 worth of lettuce. So, okay.
Right.
Yeah.
And if you could imagine, right, you have a chef who, we all know that talent in our industry right now. So you could imagine an owner who's frustrated that, they're not making margins, and then they're leaning on a chef that may have a team of 3 or 4 to, well, I want an entirely new menu, and I want it costed, and I want to taste everything, and I want it to be efficient, and I want you to compare all of your vendors' price points and quality, by next week, right? And that chef is just like, well, how am I supposed to do that? Especially when they're in the middle of operations, it just becomes kind of like a roller coaster of, I'd say frustration, disappointment, and lack of resource, right? So like we come in and we say, well, let us assist with that. And, sometimes we work specifically with those teams, right? Like we'll work with a chef, an executive chef, a sous chef, et cetera. And in other cases, we'll do it literally just with the ownership. And then once approved, we'll train the team on it. Right. There's a lot of different kind of ways to this recipe. And that kind of goes into how it involves real estate. A couple of years ago, obviously, retail broke its leg, right? Like retail used to literally be like the anchor of any development, right? You had to have great retail. They were great tenants. They're paying huge leases. People loved to shop. You didn't have as much online presence within retail, and that became like an anchor. And now it's F&B, right? Like F&B is the heart and soul, I think, of any development, any hotel. And we've seen it, right? We've seen that you could have 2 hotels sitting side by side. One could be a destination location, with maybe, a preferred restaurant group or a chef, and the other could have, and more of an amenitized
crickets.
F&B.
Yeah.
You can charge anywhere from 100 to, I've seen 200 to 300 above the ADR of the person next to you, just because you have a great restaurant, right? So developers, they love that formula. And some of them, they will purchase a piece of property that has a restaurant, and now they're a restaurant owner. Or you'll have a hotelier who is building a hotel and wants to find out, is this the right concept for my hotel to get the draw that I need? And, as we do that, especially within the last 5 years, markets have changed. If you had a hotel in DC, you used to just open a steakhouse, right? Like
no brainer.
Steakhouse
Yeah.
in DC, you're going to be fine. And now, the top 5 restaurants in DC are all like very ethnic driven, right? It's like Indian food, it's Thai food, it's a combination, right? French food, Italian food, steakhouses where those used to be like the real go-tos. That's no longer the case, right? So we come in and we help do that due diligence, and then we also help select the operator, right? Brokers, so we have a very different, motivation where a broker, they want the biggest commission, right? And most of the time in that realm, it's a corporate client, right? It's someone who can pay these outrageous leases
without thinking about it. Yeah.
Right. Without thinking about it. But most of the time to someone like you and I, that's not very interesting. Right. So I'm not really going to be excited to go to a hotel that has a Morton's in it. Right. Which even though, Morton's is a great concept. Right. But like, I'm not getting out of bed, waking up early, planning my day about going to Morton's.
Roots Chris, let's go. Yeah.
Right. So if you go after, someone that's a little bit more aligned with a narrative, people get excited. And now they're willing to, in certain cases, they're willing to stay at that hotel for preferred reservations or just, proximity. And they'll pay more. They'll pay more of an ADR, right? And then from a talent pool, you're going to get better employee. Well, I don't want to say better, but, you're going to get probably more passionate employees when it's something that's a little bit more F&B driven than more of a corporate concept.
Agreed, 100%. And just in my experience, there's a pro and a con to steakhouses. The pro is that the dishes are expensive. The con is that the dishes are expensive. So you kind of will sometimes attract someone who's only in it for the money. And, I'm not one to judge. We're all here to make money at the end of the day. But I'm thinking back. Have you ever been to Santa Fe?
Yeah.
Yeah. Joseph's Culinary Pub?
No.
So classic example. He won like best chef in New Mexico a long time ago. He's gotten a lot of awards, but he there are places that the food is just expensive just because it's expensive, but he has a passion for his food that you can't fake. Like when you're there, when you talk to the people that work there, you talk to the star that runs it, you talk to like any of the servers, like they care deeply. Like, I mean, it is more on the pricey side. It's not like upscale steakhouse pricey, but you almost need a little bit of intrigue to attract the right person who's going to stay there and keep people coming back versus just like kind of a mercenary server. Does that make sense?
No, 100%. And you see that more in the culinary world, right? Like with the QSR kind of like repositioning hourly wages. Like if I can work at a McDonald's or a Burger King for $15 to $16 an hour, like that makes no sense unless I'm passionate about culinary and you're serving something that's interesting and I can learn. Like if not, I'm not going to do it. I'm just going to go work at a McDonald's or, one of these QSRs, Chipotle, and, I'll make my hourly wage and probably even have better benefits than the independent restaurant.
Fair. And
go home, right? So it's like you really do have to attack the different desires, I think, of talent nowadays, right? Like culture, like I said, I think interest when it comes to cooking, hopefully creating a slingshot for someone's career, work-life balance, right? Like there's so many things post-COVID that this new wave of industry professionals are looking for, and most people aren't really prepared for it.
Yeah. And I've heard a lot of people say that COVID messed up the job market. I'm not sure if I've landed my hat there yet, but it definitely changed it. Definitely changed a lot of things,
100%.
Yeah.
100%. I mean, I think I sit in the same place you do, right? Where I'm not sure it like messed it up. I do think it helped re-gauge us as operators, right? Because I mean, the world of working someone 60 hours a week and screaming at them when they do something wrong, taking a front of house person in the coffee room and, berating them for
when they like substituted fries
check.
Or something. Yeah.
Right. Like that world, although it worked at a certain point, it's definitely not right. I remember when I first started in the industry, I had a chef throw a plate at me. And didn't really think twice about it after it happened. Like I was like, oh, that was close and I missed it, right? And
there's Shane again,
Right, like, and the GM's just like, don't go to the kitchen for 20 minutes, right? Like there was really nothing that was odd about that, which if you think about it nowadays, you're like,
it's
wow,
odd.
that was very, that was pretty messed up. So, I think that it did help us look at what it is we're doing, how we're treating our people, our talent, and how important they really are to the day-to-day operation, where it used to be everybody's expendable. Now we're looking at them like, we really do have to create like a positive work environment and offer something above just money, because everyone offers money. Right? Like no one's really working, staging is not really something that happens anymore. In some markets, it's not even legal. So if everyone's paying, why am I going to work for you over someone else? Right? And it makes, I think, us as the professionals and leaders in this industry to really start to ask, well, why should they? What am I doing? Right? Like what type of culture or environment or business do I actually want to run? And, sometimes when we sit down and we do leadership sourcing for people, that's one of the first questions. And, you'd be shocked at just that dead silence where people are like,
I saw the price range. That's all. Like, that's why I'm here. Yeah.
You're like, I know what we are creating here. So, I think it just kind of realigned or just repositioned the way that we're all looking at our business, and don't get me wrong. I think that at the same time, the talent in our industry also changed, right? So I wouldn't say that like COVID,
that's something we could talk about that.
Just younger, the younger talent pool, they want more faster without having the experience and sometimes willingness to actually learn to get it, right? Like I've hired people where, we hire a chef and, they want to come in as, oh, well, I want to be the executive sous. Well, that's a number 2. And they're like, yeah. And you're like, oh, you've been in the industry for about 2 years now, and they're like, well, that that's what I want. And you're just kind of like, okay. So I think that at the same time where COVID definitely adjusted the way that we should treat our talent. It also, at the same time, we have, if they're millennials or just like this specific generation.
Yeah, what happened there?
That just kind of, doesn't fully understand our industry the way that some of the older school, do, right? So it was kind of at the same time it kind of happened. So we're all just kind of trying to figure out
what we're doing here. Yeah. No, and I think, I'm really glad that we're talking so much about chefs here, because I feel like chefs are a unique challenge. It's a very unique job. And I'm almost thinking about it like what you do with barrel age management. It seems like it almost takes a team to fully do something that we expect one person to do. And which is weird, because the best chefs out there I know are good at working the line. They do know how to write the schedule. They also know how to price the things and source the goods. But if you start talking about what a truly world-class chef does, it does sound like you're describing 15 different hats, you're proficient in math and yeah.
Right? That's what I think when people say, I want to hire a chef, right? We usually, second question, great. Well, what's the scope of work and responsibilities? And like you said, usually it's a laundry list, right? And, I'd say a chef is very similar to a captain, right? Captain of a ship. Where, if you don't have all of the positions on the ship, you don't expect the captain to be able to do everything, right? It's impossible. You would sink. It's not even feasible. You're talking about large operations. So when someone hires a chef and they hire this one person and they're like, great, now I have the chef and he can do all of this or she can do all of that. And you're like, well, how? How would you do that within the day, right? So I think that people really confuse all of the positions in the back of house, right? A director of culinary is not a chef, right? A tournat that really is trained on every single station, how to do every single dish. In certain cases, no, that's not your chef, right? Because if your chef is on the line 10 hours a day, who's running the restaurant?
Who's ordering the produce? Yeah.
Right, who's actually doing that, right? And then you start to see some of these positions when you dissect it, right? In larger, at least in larger resorts, you have directors of purchasing, right? You have your entire human resource department, which does a lot of things people expect the quote unquote chef to do. So, I think that you really have to look at your operation, and every operation is different, right? If it's high volume, if it's more refined. But I think people expecting, and they're doing this in every department, right? Oh, well, I hired an F&B director, right? We're good with the hotel. And you're like, well, you're a 3-meal period, you're open, 26 hours a day, which is almost impossible, right? And you're like, that extra 2 hours just comes out of nowhere. And you're just, but I have this one person, so we're good. And you're like, well, you're open 7 days a week, and this is a 24-hour operation. How is one F&B director going to run this entire hotel, right?
The truth is they're not going to after 3 months. Yeah.
Right. They're not going to. And I think that also comes down to, what we were just discussing is so now what are you offering? You got the salary. Okay. Everyone's offering a salary. What resources are you giving them? And then what are their expectations? Because if you're expecting, full on corporate responses and productivity for one person, well, yeah, that person is not going to be successful. And then they're going to get upset and then they're going to leave. Right, so it's it becomes this kind of snowball effect. But yeah, they're all very difficult positions, right? I mean, we all know that restaurants and hotels, it's one of the most difficult industries, I think, to be successful in. But it also teaches you the most amount of skills that's transferable to so many different departments.
Oh yeah, No, I mean, I think it was Anthony Bourdain that said, "You don't know yourself till you stand in between a hungry guest and their pork chop," and it's like. Yeah, we've all been there.
100%.
So, okay. So let's imagine that, I'm more restaurant side. So the hotel side does intrigue me, but I'm probably going to stay restaurant side. Let's imagine that, say I had a little small mom and pop shop, which I don't, and let's say I'm struggling and I come to you all. What are going to be some of the first things that you ask me about? And what are some of the big levers that kind of move the needle for us as we start working together?
Well, I think one of the first things is we try to find out how much the ownership and operators, sometimes they're different, really understand their business, right? A lot, almost, I'd say 80% of our clients, if we come in and we say, well, what's your daily break even? Just how much do you have to make a day? Most cannot answer that question. And, fundamentally, that is your foundation. Right, is that you have to know how much you need to make on a daily basis. And every day is a little bit different, right? Because labor adjust on different days, right? So it almost becomes a daily break even. What is that number? Because a lot of people, they focus on, I'd say, like the classic margins, right? Where like everything should basically be around 30%, right? My food cost should be around 30%, my labor should be around 30%, my rent should be about 8%, right? Like these old school numbers that have never changed, if you would, like Restaurant for Dummies, right? Like
wine is marked up 3 times and buy the glass 4 and you shall not pass.
Right.
And
Right. And it's like the same formula that does not really match the market nowadays, right? Like I haven't seen, at least within the newer deals, no one's getting a 5% rent anymore. It's just, I just haven't seen it forever, and no one's usually doing that. And I think there's a huge, especially within a mom and pop, we always say that it's about driving profitability, not margins. And people are like, well, what are the real differences there? And he said, well, to us, a margin is something that you're told, right? This is what my margin should be. And like you said, wine, X, right? But if I said to you, okay, well, I have this bottle of wine and it costs $100 and I can go sell it for $200 and it's the number one wine. We sell, 15 a day. Well, that's $100 profit on every single bottle of wine, right? But on paper, your margin is out of whack.
50%.
Right? This does not make any sense. Your margins don't make any sense here. You're going to fail. And you say, well, in any other business, if I buy something for one price and I can double it, that seems like a pretty good profitability there, right? So, we tend to look at mom and pops and say, you're in a different position than, say, a corporate restaurant with institutional funding, right? Because, when you're looking at these margins, people are just, they're really meant for like larger corporations where oversight is remote. Let me look at this P&L. I've never been there, and let's just see if their numbers are.
The CFO wants to know why management labor is up by 2% this month. He's like,
right?
God,
like they just want to see these percentages, and they have to be able to gauge it somewhere. If you're a mom and pop with one operation and you fully understand your break even and you go after real profitability, you could be successful. And that's like one of the first things. We're like, let's look at what your daily break even is. Let's understand your business. Then let's really look at, where your volume lies, and let's build on that, right? Some people think, well, we're really busy on a Friday, so let's increase labor. But you may make less on a Friday than you do on a Tuesday, because maybe you're at this break point where your volume meets your labor, meets your profitability markup in the perfect formula, where your Tuesday is actually a lot more profitable than your Friday, because on your Friday, you have maybe more labor, or maybe, you're not selling the same not the same quality, but like they're not the same menu items. Well, right? New York, the bridge and tunnel.
Yeah.
Right. Where it's like on a Friday, you're really not selling like the higher end items than you do on a Thursday.
No,
right?
I was going to say,
try to work at that.
My restaurant's a prime example where we have, so I am Steakhouse. It just is what it is.
Well, fantastic.
And
I think steakhouses are great.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, it's paid the bills for years. Guy. We have a section of the menu is chef's favorites, so it's more affordable options. It's like the chicken marsala is on there, the filet tips. So just a little bit more approachable, a little bit smaller portions. And then we have the things like the dry age cowboys, like the higher end stuff. And a Tuesday, we'll have less covers, but sometimes we get the rooms rented out to pharmaceutical events. We'll have people ordering the nicer steaks, where Friday we're always busier, but it's like filet tips, chicken marsala. Like it's the date night for the couple that comes out once a year, and they just no appetizers, just we're going to split an entree. It's like, fair enough. And we love having them come back every day, but yeah.
We say, there was a saying that says, volume hides everything, right? And we go, well, we think that volume blinds everybody, right? We're like, you may have a really busy restaurant, right? And like, I remember I had this client and, he was crushing it on happy hour. I mean, crushing it. We're talking about just, 200 people, line waiting for it, right? And he's looking at it, he's like, I just don't understand, my restaurant's so busy. We're so busy for like 2-3 hours a day during this happy hour. And then you start to look and you're like, well, your profitability's off, your margin is correct, but like you have to remember you're using cross-utilized product. So yes, in this area, you're selling, say, for example, the trimmings of your filet as this tartare that you're undercharging for, so you're crushing it, but you're not actually selling the fillets that you're, that the trimmings are from at the right price point, at the right volume. So like you think you see these busy restaurants, right? And you always wonder, how do some of these close? And then, that's kind of like the first area. And then the second, we always say, well, when was the last time you renegotiated your vendor, right? Or even tried to negotiate with your landlord if you're not doing well, right? A lot of people within our industry, especially mom and pops, there's a certain passion, which sometimes equates to a certain pride, right? Where they don't want to go back to a vendor that they've been dealing with for 30 years and say, hey, listen, we've been paying the same for you. What about a rebate? Or like, can we get XYZ? Or even going to your landlord and saying, we've been on this set rent for 20 years, is there any way that we can go to like a percentage base just because, maybe my market has become more seasonal? People in my market, like in Miami, they fully do not understand that we are a seasonal market. Everybody comes down here. They see everything that's opening. We're busy in the off season, but people don't spend in the off season, not as much. And we're busy, but we're not as busy, and we're not like an Aspen where you see it as much, right? We're like, you see the seasonality where you're not slow season. In Miami, we still have millions of people on an off season, but the people who really make up Miami, it's the families and the professionals, and then obviously the people who work in this industry, and they're not spending the way that a snowbird spends or a tourist, right? So like when you come here and you're like, well, there's so many people, you're busy all year round. You're like, well, we have volume all year round, but we're not busy. It's not the same thing. So they're coming here and they're signing these extreme rents, and they're not sustainable. Right. And then they also don't realize that, their thought process is the same as everybody else's. So now our competition is so much higher. Right. So there's a dilution of that volume. So, I think it's also, again, more for the mom and pops. It's like really understanding your market and how it changes every 2 years. If you're a business that's been open for 20 years and you've been running it the same way, which I think most old school operators still believe that consistency is number one. And it is, right? But it depends on what you're being consistent about.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like we always say, please.
Well, no, I was just going to say 0 to 1 is being consistent. So if you can't be consistent to start, you're going to shut down almost certainly, but you have to evolve after that.
But it's consistency in practice, right? So it's like we want to be, as restaurateurs, we want to be consistent in quality. We want to be consistent in guest satisfaction. We want to be consistent in, I think, relationship building overall with our staffs and with our guests. But like, we don't want to be consistent in our purchasing strategy, right? Like, we don't want to be consistent in our menu pricing because obviously things fluctuate. So, I think the days of I'm just going to do it the same way every single day over a 10-year period, which used to work, is now become a little troublesome. So that's like the second thing that we kind of discuss with the mom and pops. And then, I think third, if it gets to a point where they're at the point of no return, they're not doing well, and they realize that, us coming in isn't really going to help them. We say, listen, let's look at your strategic partnerships, right? Most of these people, they do have below market rents, or they do have prime locations, right? Or, maybe they just don't have the drive, right, to get over this next hump. And there's a lot of people that do. Right. So like, maybe coming in with a restaurant group or finding, a managing partner to come in that can really help, drive the operation, or, partnering with a different set of purveyors, right, at a different cost point. Like there's a lot of these things that people just don't really look at. A marketing partner, again, it's not necessarily the best strategy, but within the marketing field, it's social media, looking at influencers, like they're, these things do work in certain markets, right? And like most of the time, the old school mom and pops just don't look at it the same way.
Yeah. No one's like over the age of 60 thinking, man, if I could get a TikTok influencer in here, we're gonna crush it. Yeah. But yeah. And
it's amazing, like really there's a lot of operators, and I don't know what it is lately, but we've had a lot of clients between the ages of 65 and 80 over the last year that own these amazing properties. They're starting to just think outside the box, right? They're starting to think, wow, I put so much into this. I don't want to just sell it or close it, but I need someone to come in and help, kind of partner with me to adapt to this new environment, right? And some of them are hoteliers, some of them own these old school restaurants that, 30 years old, and they're just like, I see it, right? And they also have that drive where they put so much into it. They built such a solid foundation. And it's been interesting, because they're a wealth of knowledge and they have so much experience, but the market has changed so much that, you're looking at it like, wow, you really can't adapt it to now. And it's not worth closing because, again, like I said, sometimes it's the deals, the locations, the reputations, the names of these brands. And I think there's a secondary life there, right? And, we're working on a really great project in Cambridge called Henrietta's, which is a 30-year-old restaurant, probably one of the first farm to table. And over a period of time, it's a very successful restaurant, but it's become a little bit amenitized, right? Where like the menu still kind of caters to one very specific demographic, and the ownership group realizes, wow, we're still in Cambridge, Harvard Square, right? There's a lot of opportunity here. And we've been working with them on just kind of refining and broadening some of the offerings to cater to this new kind of clientele where, again, Boston, right? You open a seafood restaurant, we're fine. And that's just not the case anymore, right? It's like, no, we want like Asian, or we want, we want Thai. And, we're helping kind of adapt that. And it's really interesting to see the responses, right? Because you have like this new kind of wave of clientele seeing it for the first time. But at the same time, you have some, some regulars who are like, I'm not sure if I love this change, But yeah, I think the mom and pop, they have a lot of potential within continuing their operations. They just have to understand the businesses have changed. And it's hard to tell them that because they know it so well because they've been in it so long.
Okay, sorry to interrupt. I promise we will get back to the show. I just wanted to take a quick second and ask, if you have not had a chance to rate the show on whatever platform you are, please go and just hit that button. I prefer 5 stars, but I will take whatever I got. The more ratings we get, the more people we get exposed to, the more people can hear these stories, and the more we can grow. It'd mean the world to me, truly. All right, back to Seth and Andrew. No, it strikes me too when you're talking about 30-year-old businesses. So I'm 35, and I'm just thinking about the progression of my life. I grew up, I had dial-up internet. And when I went to college, I was just in that like area where I was getting like phones, but they weren't quite smart. Like just right on that age cusp where I printed out MapQuest directions to college.
Yeah, of course.
And then when I left college, I had a smartphone. Like just thinking about, starting off with barely no internet all the way to where we are now in 2026. 6 years past COVID, the rise of AI, like a 30-year restaurant has seen so much. So much has changed. You start off doing inventory with pen and paper, and then you finish off with like scanners and AI and all sorts of crazy stuff. Restaurant 365, name it, and you got all sorts of different systems set up.
It's wild. And the problem is, if you're a mom and pop in a prime location for 30 years and you haven't adapted, to these new kind of resources, someone's going to open up right next to you, and they are. And most of the time, they're fully going to understand it because they're new, right? And they're like, they've been doing this. They've been, maybe they were successful in another, and this is a secondary location. So it's also harder where it's not necessarily not adapting, but it's also understanding your competition, where someone may right next to you, AI augmented reservation resource assistance, where, you don't even have your open table doing mass email marketing, right? So it's like it's not even just you by yourself. It's now you playing in a different playground, right? Where it's a hard thing to adapt to, and like you said, it happens so quickly.
There's a Indian restaurant in town, which I won't name. Actually, I don't mind. Star Indian Cuisine here. The food is awesome. I bring them up because they have a once a month buffet, and they recommend reservations. And I was like, yes, sign us up, me and my wife. And she came over with a pad and a pencil, and she wrote down our names. And then she walked away, and I was like, that's... In my head, I was like, when I show up, am I going to have a table? Like,
You're like, is that going to work?
Yeah.
I going to actually have a reservation?
Seriously, if you show up in Omaha, they are freaking fantastic. Great food, buffet, out of this world. Reservation system's a little antiquated. What do you...
You'd be surprised at how many restaurants still do that. You'd be shocked.
I would, even my restaurant group, Hal Smith, They switched over to Open Table. It's been about 12 years ago. And I think before that, it was just pen and paper. And then they all still remember this. I joined about 8 years ago. But they all still remember like I think it was Mother's Day when the database went down, and they're like still like scarred from that day. It hasn't happened since, and it works well. But I think there's a trepidation in the new technologies for some of these old school people because there's no need to back up a pen and paper unless you lose the pen and paper. It is its own backup.
Well, then it's what happens after, right? Like, I just wrote down your name and your phone number and your email address on this pad. Now what, right? There's companies that make billions of dollars just selling that type of information, right?
Yeah.
What are you going to do with it now? And it's like, we have this one client, they were looking to, kind of refresh, and they did the same thing. They had this pad and paper at the door, very nice book. And I start flipping through it, right? And they had every year, right, like a calendar, like a jet, like just every year they had their stock of reservation books, going back, God knows, 5-6 years. And I'm like, do you communicate with any of these people? And, the guy was just like, well, like how?
Say hello at the door, yeah.
Well, how would I communicate with them, And I'm like, take down their email addresses, text marketing, like do anything. And they're like, no. They follow us on Facebook. And you're like, okay, right? But he's sitting on, years, thousands of guests that either are local or destination that they could be communicating with, and, in a certain case, inviting them to come in, telling them about my promotion, activations, right? Like, buffet on a certain day, just any type of information. But, people don't look at it as much like that. It was, I open a good restaurant, I serve good food, I have good service, I'm consistent with my product, and people will come. That was the formula, right? And that just, although it should work, it doesn't work as much anymore.
Or I guess it could work, but why would you want to leave it up to chance? Kind of, when you have a choice of trying something different.
Right? People want to connect. And I think this is, going back to the beginning of our conversation, one of the reasons why, I feel that F&B is really like the heart and the soul of really any kind of development. I'd even say neighborhood to a certain respect, is that, people connect with food.
It's an emotional experience
eats,
first.
Right?
Yeah.
Everybody eats. Everybody has that one dish that they can take a bite of, and it will just bring them right back to the first time they've ever had it. Mm-hmm. Or, they're on a vacation, or they have a bite of a dish, and then that dish represents the vacation, right? Where you're like, oh, I was on this cruise ship, or I was on this, whatever, what backpacking trip, and
remember the cheese in Mexico.
Thing.
Remember that one wine we had in the Loire. Yes, yeah.
It's like you just have that thing. People want to connect. So I feel like, if you can create that connection with people, they're going to continue to come back. But sometimes you forget. Our days are busy. So it's hard when, if I could remember that one place, I had that one thing, and then all of a sudden it popped up on my phone, and I was like, oh, wow, that's where we should go tonight. We should go back there. And you have to help create that. Sometimes it just doesn't happen organically, right? And now we have tools, and we have resources, and we have ways to do that where, at a certain time when you were writing it down, we didn't. So, why not take advantage?
Do you think the increasing use of AI, is it leading to less of a personal touch, though? Just curious.
Yeah, I mean, listen, AI is obviously a huge topic in our industry right now. I mean, all over the world, right? And we were lucky enough to be pretty early adapters. We have a house engine that's customized, that we help build. And I think there's, like anything, there's a time and place to use it. Like any tool or resource, I think outside of mom and pops, I think institutional money and investors look at it as a way to save money. Oh, wow, I have this technology. How can I use it to save money? Let's replace hosts with, augmented reality that can book reservations, right? Let's replace, I've even seen it, chefs to help, create recipes through AI. And right now, AI seems very smart. It looks like a very smart tool. It's a very convenient tool, right? Like AI is basically the consolidation and aggregation of information. It's not truly creative. Right? It's taking information and things that are already out there and providing it to you in a way that feels relatable and understandable. So it seems like a person, right? So I think that people look at it and they're using it incorrectly personally, right? I think that AI is a tool to help your team. I do not think that AI replaces your team. It can replace certain redundant positions, yes, but I don't think it can replace everybody, right? Like obviously the same way the internet, may have replaced certain researchers, right? That makes sense because, there are certain things that adapt. But, to use AI in a way where you were replacing entire departments and disconnecting from your guest, I think it's dangerous. Like we have this, we call it, it's almost like, I saw the term on someone, I think it was a hotel ad, or maybe it was a restaurant ad, where it said, human first. And that was a very scary thing to read,
Yeah.
It immediately pops you in the Terminator kind of, kind of mode where you're like, wow, do we have to define human connection
first
now, right? And we have this, we have a movement, we're calling it, deactivated hospitality, where, hospitality at its core is connection and authenticity and having a proactive kind of approach to someone's needs with a level of servitude that you're willing to put above your own, right? That's like true hospitality. And a computer doesn't understand that, right? You can use it for that, but I think that it definitely changes the way that people are running restaurants. We've already seen certain restaurants and hotel groups replace their reservationists with AI. And everybody that I speak to, they get very frustrated because, yeah, fine, it kind of seems smart, but, we've all been in a situation where we're like, representative.
Yeah, zero,
right?
representative.
Zero, and like, right? And you know what? That may work with a bank. You don't have another choice, right? Fine.
Yeah.
Your bank wants to use it. Okay, fine, I'll deal with it. Your doctor's office. Okay, I'll deal with it. But with hospitality, it's still a choice, right? You don't really get locked. I mean, don't get me wrong, a bank and a doctor is a choice, but it's harder to change. But a restaurant, a lot easier to just be like, I'm going to hang up and I'm going to call someone else, right? Like it's a hotel, same thing. I'm trying to make a reservation. Like it's very easy, I think, to change their minds. And I think the more companies that do it, the more people are really going to drive for a human connection, right?
Yeah.
So if you don't start looking at AI and saying, you know what, this is a way to provide and consolidate information, mass amounts of it in a usable way, I think our industry is going to have some real problems.
I've got, I think, a couple of stances on this. I'll just flesh out a couple of them.
Yeah.
The first, I think that, we may actually live long enough to see this problem removed, where I think if I were talking to someone on the phone making a reservation and I didn't know it was AI, I don't know if I would be bothered. If it gets good enough that, I think it was Alex Hormozy that had this example of there may be a day when you call a call center and you say, "Are you AI?" Oh, thank God, because I know you know all my information. You can help me faster than any human. There might be a day it flips. We'll see. Maybe not. Are you familiar with Rory Sutherland? So
No.
He's a big marketing guy. He works at Ogilvy, and one of his big examples about what he doesn't trust with technology, a lot of people in Silicon Valley will look at a position and like his classic example is the doorman at a fancy hotel. And like, we don't need a doorman. We can just install like revolving door, solve the problem. And when that happens, what inevitably happens is the function of a doorman, it wasn't only to open the door. He was also hailing cabs. He was also making sure that, if there's like someone out there who's a little shady, that'd be like, hey, keep going, keep walking along. There's also the added benefit of like, oh, this is a hotel that needs a doorman. This must be a upper class place, So there's all these different tangential things that you don't think about when you have a human being sitting there doing a job. Like the host is also there to smile and say hello when you walk up, not just to answer the phone and take your reservation. And she's also watering the plants. And if you're super busy, maybe she resets a table real fast to help get people. Like there's all these tangential benefits to having a human being there that when you narrowly define the role, you start losing. And then when you're talking about like how to use AI, I was thinking It's almost like me asking, like, are books good or not for the future? You know, it depends on which books you're talking about. Like,
right.
Yeah,
Exactly.
you can use books to learn a lot of things, and you can also, like, read some propaganda or some weird stuff. Like, just kind of...
It's also industries, right? It's like, you know, if we're talking about, you know, if you and I were having a conversation about AI in general, right? Very different answers. But when we're talking about AI in hospitality, especially like the restaurant business, you know, it's a different conversation, right? Like, I think, again, if you're Delta and you're just dealing with, you know, hundreds of calls a day and you want to put in, you know, an AI reservationist to help smooth things along, you know, fine, that makes sense. But, you know, even now, think about it like this. Do you have a Vero? Are you familiar with a Vero?
No, tell me about that.
Well, Avero is basically just like an online financial reporting tool that connects to your restaurant so you can aggregate information easily. But like we use Restaurant 365. Like you said, you use OpenTable, right? Okay, Restaurant 365.
Yeah. Perfect,
right? So Restaurant 365. Now, that gives you a lot of information, lots of reporting, right?
More than I could go through in my lifetime. Yes.
More than you can go through in your lifetime. So you're getting all this information, right? So like, say for example, and we'll just stick with this one. We have AI at your front door, right? And it's making all of your reservations, and you can't even tell, right? You can't tell. It's perfect. It asks you your name. Are you celebrating anything? Do you have any allergens, right? It's asking all the right questions. It's logging all this information, right? The problem that we have in our industry is we have a lot of tools, and is everybody using them consistently? And, you know, when you have, say, for example, your maitre d' or your reservationist answering the phone and they're working that night and they're taking the reservations and, you know, they're getting this information as it starts coming, right? If I have some AI agent making perfect OpenTable notes, right, and that chit comes out and we're passing it along the restaurant, right, and it says, let's just say, for example, you know, allergen, nut allergy,
something
severe,
serious. Yeah,
nut allergy, right? And no one actually heard it. It's just on a report in OpenTable in a guest note now on the corner that was done automatically, and it's just passing around the restaurant, right? Person at the door, you know, print out our notes. They're now robotic. They're volume, right? Like they're in the middle. They're in the weeds. 200 cover, right? And they're just going and they're printing all these things out. And there's no fail safe, right? We are now just relying on an aggregate tool to collect information. And now it still falls back to the people who are running the business. So the way that I look at it is like, if you're going to use AI in a people-ran business, use it as a tool to create more attention and more focus, right? As opposed to replacing those important elements of the connection now. In the future, you know, maybe there's more ways, right? It's a support mechanism, I think, to me. Also great data research, right? Finding out, you know, are you serving the right things at the right price points with the right menus, the right concepts? Lots of ways to use it. But I think that just in our industry, like you said, with reading the right book, you know, kind of like sending your kids to school, is you really got to make sure you're using it the right way and that everybody who is using it fully understands how to use it. And in a business where we went from, you know, a sheet of paper and a pad, from reservations to taking orders to putting it up in the computers. You know, when I first started, you know, you used to have almost like a large, you know, you stick your ticket in and you're spitting it to your kitchen, right?
Yep,
This is old school, right? Now we have, you know, POS, KDS, big screens. But like to this day, not everybody even understands the technology we have right now, the basic ones, right? Because we're also in a business where not everybody is career, right? Not everyone is passion. Some of these people, it's their second job. Some of these people, they're college students, right? So
one day a week here,
right,
yeah.
you know, one day a week, part-time, you know, like, so I think it's a harder business to adapt it to. I think there's a lot of potential in it, but like anything, I think it's how we use it.
No, and I think the allergy example is perfect there, because I'm thinking if a human takes that reservation note, they're going to tell someone. You know, like you have a personal responsibility, where if it's just perfectly dictated in a little chit of paper that gets thrown away. But I say that, and if you're the host taking that reservation for tomorrow and you're off tomorrow, maybe not. You know, like things do fall through the cracks even for humans. But
100%.
For AI,
we need fail safes.
Yeah.
In our business, we need fail safes. We need to touch. You know, to this day, every chef, good one, or we'll call it expediter, right? They still touch the plate before it goes out. They still do it, right?
Yeah.
Just to make sure it's hot. They know the systems are there, right? Like there's a plate warmer and, you know, there's heat lamps and, you know, the steak, especially steak, just came off either the broiler or the grill, like it's got to be hot. We know it, right? There's all these things, but you still touch it just in case.
Just to make sure.
Right? It's just like in our brains, right? And I think that's the difference of hospitality is we are about every minute detail.
Yeah.
So if it's another business, makes sense.
We can't track every minute detail. I was thinking like Restaurant 365 gives me a alert or warning when the price of like strawberries goes up by 2%. And I mean, there's no world where I'm going to track the price of strawberries day after day, but the computer can, and it doesn't matter. It just spits that up as a warning and like, good to know, so.
And that's a great tool, right?
Yeah.
But you wouldn't, and I think Restaurant 365 is a good example, right? Because it provides you with all this information, but I'm willing to bet if there was a purchase feature where Restaurant 365 would actually reach out to your vendor and buy it for you, you'd still be like, you know what? Let me just have my chef look at this.
Let me hit like send first. Yeah. No,
Right?
and
Like,
I mean, so for us,
hard.
we do a huge meat order. It's like 20 to 40,000 each week, and we track it back. We have a system where it's the last like average for the last month and a half, pretty much, and then we will get the like average based on what's on hand. And we still tweak it a little just because, there is that human element. There are little bitty things that you can't quite feed in. Like how many lunches do you think are going to be signed up, even though we're dinner only, people can still rent it out. But those contracts aren't signed yet. There's all this
right.
But we get a general idea and kind of go from there.
And there's a chain, right? So like, for example, because I run steakhouses too, is that, and sometimes it's a cog in the wheel, right? Say, for example, you're selling a certain amount, you're buying a certain amount, but for example, the purveyor that you're using just hired a new butcher, right? On their end. And you just start realizing that, your ribeyes, the eye, just isn't as pretty as it used to be, right? It's just not the same. There's something going on. And you're automatically buying and you're looking at this. And if we don't have that one more layer that, I think the human touch, almost in a way, the human eye of being like, to a computer, it's weight, it's numbers, it's consistency, it's information, right? But I think especially within restaurants, sometimes that's just the base, right? Then we have the things that set us apart. It's the touch, the feel, the smell, the ambiance, the service, right? All those things that are creating these connections. And, I use a steakhouse because I'm a partner in a steakhouse now, and, we do great, same thing, right? We order a certain amount of steak every single week. We have an amazing yield sheet, right? Like what we're buying it, what we're cutting it, what we're wasting, how we're using the trimmings, right? We have all of this. And I use this example, and we just started realizing like, wow, my bone-in New York strip, it's just doesn't look the same.
Something weird,
right?
yeah.
Like there's something just going on, and we have this huge, loin of it, and we're like, what are we gonna do? And then we call and we talk to him. He's like, our butcher left. We just hired a new butcher. Thank you for this information. We're realizing, and we deal with that. So there's other things in the chain of our industry that affects some of this aggregate information, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's where we're just a little different. Again, great tool, great resource, lots of ways to use it.
Yeah, it'd be better to have it than not. I think it was Einstein that said, not everything that can be measured is important, and also not everything that's important can be measured. So you got to remember, there's a flip side to that. What do you think? What do you think's in store for restaurants and hotels in the future? Do you have any big predictions coming up?
Well, funny is on this topic is I do think there's going to be more attention to the detailed market of convenience versus the human touch, right? I do think that people are going to really start to, right now we define by stars, by price point. I think there's going to start to be definition within experience, which is something that we've never really seen before, right? It's still in genre, QSR, bistro, fine dining, which really describes more of service, right? But I think you're going to start to see definition of experience, right? We've already seen kind of the rural, glamping kind of like creating its own sector in our business, which is about disconnection, right? Deconnecting from everything. So I think that's kind of a big one. I think we are going to see a lot more robotics in our industry, as we're already starting to see it outside of AI, but like actual robotics.
And then human first is a counter movement.
Right?
Yeah.
I saw a piece of equipment that makes pizza, automated. So I think we're going to see a lot more of like that, of the robotic aspect. I think we're going to see a rise of the independents. I think that now, the boutique restaurant, the boutique hotel, used to be defined by being a little rebellion, kind of against the corporate, giants, and now they're purchasing them, right? So like, I think we're going to see a little bit more of the independent sector growing and becoming probably sought after, as opposed to, right, like Marriott reward points only gets you so far. I think it maybe kind of relies a little bit on the experiential driven, but I think that people are gonna, and now independents have a lot more tools that they didn't have, and can compete a little bit more at a cheaper price point, which is, I think, a great positive AI, right? Is like now we're gonna level the playing field a little bit.
We all like a David and Goliath story for sure.
Yeah, right. Like we don't need 100 people to go out and figure out what my comp set and price point should be, right? I just need one person for 3 hours and a great AI bot, and now I can compete with the huge research and R&D departments of laundries, right? So I think that'll kind of grow. I think that this wellness, I think the wellness intertwining with restaurants is going to continue, right? Where, now, there's been a curtain over our eyes a little bit. And I think over this last year, especially, with what happened, what was the name of the company with, the free range eggs, where it's supposed to be, Vital Farms, what happened with Vital Farms?
No, I didn't hear about this. What's this?
Pretty disappointing. Vital Farms was it was like an organic egg company, charging $11, $12 a dozen eggs, right? And like kind of post-COVID, they became pretty popular, and especially with everything that's happening with wellness and knowing where your food comes from, and everybody was buying it. They were like, the price point, it's farm raised, and the yolks were just this beautiful color, and you're like, this has got to be. And they got busted. They were injecting, they were using altering hormones, and they basically just kind of got called out. And they were charging, we're talking like $11 to $13 for a dozen eggs, right? And, at the same time,
true inflationary COVID prices, yeah.
Right, true prices with a subpar product, right? People are starting to realize that, grass-fed beef isn't necessarily real. We don't have enough grass, in the States to actually supply our cattle like that, right? So I think people are really starting to get wind that you can't just slap organic on something or free range or grass fed, and that really means that it's a superior product. I think people are starting to really look at the companies, who owns them, So I think that I would even call that outside of wellness. I think sourcing will become very important over the next few years. Again, I don't necessarily know if I would call that a trend per se, but I think it'll be a focal point in our industry. So I think that's kind of a big one. Those are probably like my 4. None of them really too sexy.
But no, those are big ones. Even just to that last one, it has been wild to me that for a large portion of our recent history, you could go to most restaurants and not be able to figure out where your food came from. And that seems like a huge disconnect from where we came from, like 100 years ago. It seems like, and I'm conflicted on this because I've heard arguments on both sides. We have to remember too, when things were a little pre-industrial farming, there were a lot of people going hungry too. So like the increase in produce and the increase in production has not all been bad, but it has definitely changed things, and it's not all for the positive. And so we gotta reckon with what's good, what's working, what's not.
Yeah, I'm a huge advocate for, the problem is, like you said, right, there's the challenge is with every efficiency is a way to cut a corner, right? It gives people the opportunity to decide which lane they want to go down. And, unfortunately for us in the United States, the people who, I'm not getting political, but the people who run our country and make the decisions aren't necessarily looking out for the good of the everyday person, right? And it becomes, as it kind of should be, it becomes our responsibility to navigate that, and like if you boycott a company and you stop buying their product, there is nothing that anybody can do at the top of the chart to change the direction of that business. They're going to close. Nothing. Right. Yeah. Like the people have the power. Right. So I think that if we start saying, this Vital Farms, that's not It's not right. You shouldn't be doing that. We were taken advantage of. We were overcharged. You're basically poisoning our food. We're going to stop buying it. It doesn't matter the marketing campaign, the price point, that company shuts down, right? If we find out that, a company is selling us, prime steaks that's not actually prime and it's not actually grass fed, and, free range only just means we let them out of their,
we let them see the pasture
for an hour, and we decide to stop buying from that company, it closes, right? So I think that there's a certain level of responsibility there, and we have that opportunity. I have 2 girls, and it becomes very unfortunate when you try so hard to make sure that you're buying and getting the right things, and you don't. There's still a lot of great companies out there. It's not as convenient, right? And I think that we've become a little reliant on convenience. We want Amazon. We want to buy something and we want it there in 3 hours, right?
Now, if you've ever read any Oliver Berkman, he says it perfectly.
Yeah.
He says, just ask yourself, where in your life have you been chasing convenience? What you could do with is a little bit of inconvenience. It's like, yeah, the modern air, coddling is the help that harms. So
yeah, 100%. 100%.
No, and I'm also thinking, like, just on the note of AI, there are all these kids now in high school, and they're taking these books and they're giving homework where it's like, write a report, and they're just putting it through. And the point of the reports in high school and college were not necessarily so that you could write the report, but so you could read the book and understand the things. They're trying to cut out the middle step, and I forget what they call it, but it's like brain slop or something. But they're kids that are using AI excessively are testing worse for the first time in like human history. Like the IQ ratings are going down. So it's like it's a big question mark.
Study is that Dr. Hoffman, he does this study where he basically, people who utilize AI for basic search and just, email responses, their cognitive and their response times decline, right? Because we're not using our brain for those little things. And like, don't get me wrong, listen, I love the polish on Gmail, right? Where like you're writing it, a little polish, but like still write it.
Yeah.
Still do the work. There was
I'll never remember how to spell certain words. Embarrass. Right. It's like there are too many double letters. I don't know. But I try at least every time. I cut you out there.
And that's my point, right? Is like AI, it's a great resource, right? It's a great tool. It's a great backup, right? It's a great, it's a great thing to have in your arsenal. But giving up the control and the creativity to a robot, to a bot, is a very dangerous place to be, right? It's like the same way I feel like, these automated cars where, it's great to have assist, right? I love the fact, don't get me wrong, we all do it, right? You look at responding to a text or an email that you probably shouldn't have, and all of a sudden you get an alert or your car will stop and you're like, thank God that was there, right? I'm so glad I had that additional backup. But, we only see and read maybe like a fifth of the reports coming out of Tesla, what's happening with the automated driving. And it's not there. It's super dangerous, right? There's a lot of accidents. So it's like, again, giving up full control, I think, to anything is a little scary, right? Like we need to be involved in a certain respect. And it goes down even outside of AI. No one's going to, I think the people who, do you have children?
No.
Well, when you do, it's great to have a nanny. It's great to have even grandma, right, come in and help out. But even your parents who, they raised you, right? They're like, so obviously they know how to do it. But
didn't mess up completely.
Right? For some reason, when they become grandparents, right, you don't even recognize them. They're so loose when it comes to rules and eating and bedtime, right? All of these things. So you would never just one day say, I'm just going to let grandma or grandpa raise my kids. Done, right? Great to have them help, right? Great as a resource, right? Great as a tool, but you never really want to give up full control in something that you're passionate and you consider a priority, right? Because once you do, you're really not the one who's involved anymore. And I think giving these kids these options of using AI for reports and everything, they're taking a step out of it. They're not involved. Right?
Yeah.
AI writing it and AI grading it, like
we don't even have to go to school anymore. Yeah,
right?
I do worry too. So one of the things that I've really thought about a lot here, and I know we're coming up on time, so we'll cut it off soon. But there's a dialogue in Plato where Socrates is warning people about the future of humanity because the rise of writing is going to take away our ability to remember things. And I think about that a lot with what's going on with AI, because it makes me think, do we always, when technology shows up, is this just like what happens? Are people always concerned? They're looking at people like things are going to change, it's going to make things worse. Is it just that we're living through history and it's the first historical huge change I've been through in my life? But
it is. I mean, you're living through a milestone, right? And kind of going back to what you originally said is it didn't necessarily take away the ability to remember, but it gave the opportunity to change history in a way that benefited a certain group, right? Propaganda, in a way, where like, I know if I'm thinking the long game and I'm saying, okay, I can write down history, and the people in 40 years, they're going to be reading this. So do I tell them the truth, or do I tell them what I want them to remember? And now that becomes a choice with any tool, right? So it's like, the plane, the train, the car, right? Like, are we, we're not using horses anymore, and, maybe it's dangerous, right?
What about all those poor horse manure shovelers in New York?
We can go longer distances. I think like any tool, any change, any modification, in the end, similar to the human touch in a way, right? It becomes our responsibility. How do we want to use it? Like, how are we going to let people utilize this tool? There's always going to be people who want to use it for their own purposes. There's always going to be people who want to use it for the negative. There's always people in the positive. And I think it's kind of like that with everything that comes about. Anything new, right? We can use planes and trains to carry bombs, or we can use it to visit our loved ones, right? Like, how do we decide to do it? And I think that, right now, just the scariest thing about AI, it's the fastest thing that we've seen happen in our generation, with a government that's not, in a world government, a world power that's not regulating it. They're racing to get to it, right? Yeah. And that kind of becomes the scarier thing. It's the kind of the first time, I think even in history, that a tool like this is being created without all the regulation needed to mold it the right way, right? Everything else, people, trains, right? Planes, cars, right? Immediately you had, regulations and see, all these kind of rules.
Even kind of the closest thing I could think of, the nuclear bomb, like there's a Manhattan Project. It wasn't like ad hoc company putting it online. It was like, no, this was a whole thing.
15 of them, right? At the same time.
Where's our Chernobyl going to be,
Right. It's very controlled, right? It was like heavily regulated. Like it was kept under wraps until certain periods of milestone. I mean, again, that's a hard one to consider successful, but I guess it was. But with AI, it's like, anyone can kind of use it. Anyone can adapt it. I mean, the fact that, at Barrel Age, we created a house engine specifically for the reasons that we want to use it for, although amazing, that's also like a kind of a little scary, right? Opportunity to create like our own customized AI platform. That's a little wild, right? When you really think about it, because what if I didn't have good intentions, right? And I wanted to use it for something else, right? So it's like
Gemini X or something.
Right, so I think it's going to be I think in our field, it'll be very interesting. I'm excited about it. I'm terrified at the same time. But I think some people are going to use it in a way that is really going to define our industry. And then I think some people are going to use it in a way that kind of tears it apart.
Just like anything ever. Yeah. All right, Seth, let's bring this one home.
Anything. Yeah.
Barrel Age Management. Bam. How does someone go to find out more about you on the interwebs?
Website, probably the best way. We do have Instagram and Facebook, but good old domain kind of gets you in the right direction, because we do a lot of different things, and we kind of tailor made to the operator, right?
Perfect. I'll have that in the show notes. Seth, it was a pleasure talking to you. Thank you for coming on.
You too, Andrew. It was a blast.
Thank you for listening. That is today's episode. Now, if you have not taken a moment to check out our website, please do. It's servesyouRightPod.com. We have past episodes and all sorts of other things there. If you want to get in touch with me, that's the place to do it. I do appreciate that you've given me your most valuable asset, your time and attention. So thank you for listening, and stay tuned. We have some really cool guests coming up. I would hate it if you missed it. Cheers.